What's up, guys? Coming to you from home today. Different environment, keeping it interesting for you guys. Seriously though, I want to talk to you about strength and developing strength. There's a couple of key points that we need to consider in all strength programs, and to be honest, they are either completely ignored, not considered enough, and you might pick one or two of these, but certainly not be using all three. Or on the other hand, you may be focusing on far too many of the intricate details that we need to look at, but only once these three are well established. So, three key things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about specificity, giving direction to your training program. We're going to talk about progressive overload, which I'm sure that you've heard of by now, and if you've watched any of my videos in the past, this is absolutely key to make sure that you are continuously moving forward and making progress with your training and giving your body the stimulus to adapt. And then we're going to talk about recovery and fatigue management, because without it, ultimately your training plan, yes, short term, if you're on a 6 or 8 week block, you don't really need to think about it that much. But if you're looking to make some serious gains over, the long term and get to a point where you've really made a difference to your strength, really made a difference to your performance, then we need to be on top of this, not only on a weekly basis, so in terms of recovery days and things, but also on a monthly basis in terms of when to put your deloads in and stuff like that. So, starting out then, specificity and direction. Basically what this is the idea that we only adapt to the stimulus that we give our body. We only adapt to the things that we are trying to train. That sounds really obvious, but there's a couple of key considerations. The first one is that we can only adapt so much. So certain types of training conflict with each other. So for example, marathon running and strength development. If you're doing a lot of endurance training, it's going to have a negative impact on your strength development. Now, funnily enough, if you are adding strength training to enhance your endurance development, it doesn't seem to, as long as you can manage that fatigue, which we'll talk about in a second, it doesn't seem to have the same impact. But more endurance training certainly will have potentially a negative impact on your strength training. The other point of this is that realistically, regardless of what you're training, one or two key focuses, unless you're a beginner, in which case, do as much as you can, get them gains as early as possible in every area, great. But once you're fairly established with your training plan, then realistically you want to pick one or two key focuses. That might be strength, it might be strength and functional hypertrophy, it might be strength and power, but you probably wouldn't even go for all three of those. You probably wouldn't look at hypertrophy, strength and power all in the same block. If you do, you're spreading it a little bit thinner. You might lose some of the potential benefits that you can get from focusing just on strength or just on hypertrophy or just on power for that block. Why is that important? Well, ultimately, as things add up, the more gains we can get overall throughout this 6-month block or 12-month block, the better. And if we're spreading things too thin, then you're going to not quite get as much over the 12-month period. You might not gain as much strength, as much power, or as much muscle mass as you could do if you had focused blocks on those. And they're things that we look at and say, well, that's fairly compatible. So when you start to add pure endurance training in the mix with this, and fitness training and things that are metabolically demanding, again, doing it all at once, spread your potential adaptation so thin that you might not really make much adaptation in any area. Certainly once you're beyond that beginner stage and getting more towards advanced stages of lifting. So again, focusing on strength training, really important that you pick one or two key variables and target your program towards that. The other point in terms of specificity, and this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, because hopefully none of you is making this mistake, but if you are, you really need to consider it. If you are training for strength, train for strength. If you're training for hypertrophy, train for hypertrophy. Make sure that the reps, the sets, the rest times are all reflecting that. Same in terms of anything else that you're trying to train. Make sure that the actual methods that you're using in the gym is really sort of targeted towards what you want it to be. If you are trying to get as strong as possible without much gains in body weight, don't be doing a hypertrophy plan unless you're on a hypertrophy phase of that training program. At the same time, if you're trying to gain as much muscle mass as possible at this point, your sets of 1 to 4, 1 to 5 reps, for the most part, probably aren't going to give you enough volume. So being aware of that, really important. So progressive overload. What are we talking about here? Hopefully you've heard of this concept. It's really simple that our body only adapts to a stimulus that is beyond the sort of normal levels. So beyond habitual levels that we are used to training at. For example, if you go into the gym and you can squat 60 kilos for 8, and that's about your limit for 4 sets, and you're trying to gain some muscle, let's go in, let's squat 60 kilos for 8. But ultimately, you're going to adapt to that training load. What that means is that as you get more accustomed to that exercise and as you get stronger, 4 sets of 8 reps at 60 kilos is no longer hard enough for your training session to give you that stimulus that you need to adapt. What do you need to do? You need to add more weight to the bar, or you can add more volume, you can add more reps, more sets, but let's keep it simple. At some point, you're going to have to go from 60 kilos up to 65 kilos. Then once you adapt to that, you're going to have to go to 70 kilos. That, in sort of a nutshell, in the most basic form that we can say, that is progressive overload. Doing a little bit more because your body is adapting and you are getting stronger. Or you're getting fitter. This works if you were running and you wanted to add more distance to run or a little bit faster per run. Again, progressive overload is something that we need to consider throughout all training programs. However, in this context, strength training, really we're talking about within the realms of what that focus session is going to be. We're talking about adding more weight to the bar, or at least adding a few more reps or a few more sets overall throughout the workout. But the main thing that you're going to notice is more weight added to the bar. And that ties us nicely into this next bit, this fatigue management. Because ultimately, you keep doing that, great, but we can't do it every training session because your body won't be recovered enough to give you that level of stimulus. Initially, you might be able to, certainly if you're not lifting much weight anyway at the minute, simply because your recovery capacity might be quite good and you might not be able to give your body that much of a stimulus. But as you get stronger, it's going to be impossible for you to go in and do heavier weights every single day. More. So we look at managing fatigue during the week, and what that might be is, say, 3 heavy days. We might use an undulating type program, but there's loads of ways that we can manage fatigue. But it will probably include some days that are a little bit less intense, or even complete rest days than obviously your main focused training days. You'll have some days that are focused on training and getting that overload, some days that are more focused on recovery. Now that might be going into the gym, or it might be a rest day from home. But in addition to this, as you go throughout your program, week 1, week 2, week 3, not only are you needing to recover from that sort of training session, you're going to build up fatigue as you go through. So in week 3, you've not only got week 3's fatigue, you've also got that fatigue that you built up, although it might not be massive amounts, from week 1 and then a little bit more from week 2. So by week 4, we may need to deload. Whether that comes at week 3, week 5, week 6, if you are training to get stronger, you have to give yourself enough stimulus to get to the point that realistically your body just isn't going to be able to keep making progress at the same rate. You'll build up too much fatigue. That means that we put the deload in. That means that we spend a week or so reducing the volume, reducing the intensity a little bit as well, and just recovering from the training session, the training sessions, the training block, the training weeks. What this allows you to do is then when you get back into your training, to be stimulating the training again and achieving that new level of overload at your new level of fitness, a new level of strength. So guys, really important that you consider these: specificity and direction towards your training program, progressive overload, making sure that you're doing a little bit more week on week as you go through, and fatigue management, managing fatigue not only through the week, and obviously through the session as well. Your rest times during your session, really important, but a little bit separate to this discussion. And managing your fatigue on a longer term basis. If you're doing that, I guarantee 100% you are going to get a hell of a lot stronger. And if you've not been doing that up to now, but you've been training, start to apply these principles, and I guarantee there is no question whatsoever that you will make more progress in strength in the gym than you ever have done before. Guys, I hope this helps.